Good evening, and welcome to a talk that I'm giving here on the profundity of faith. I'm part of a group called United Israel World Union, and it's a center for learning about the faith of the Hebrew Bible. And this isn't necessarily the beliefs of everyone here, just some of my insight throughout the years. United Israel is a 501c3 educational research organization founded in 1944 by David Horowitz, who devoted its life to its goals and purposes. So it's really pretty much the focus of the one God of Abraham and the revelation of the Holy Scriptures of the Hebrew Bible. While this might seem a little arrogant and presumptuous, it's not only a talk for those here today, but also for the progeny as it follows and wondered what we thought about faith and so forth, particularly those people seeking to learn about faith and could possibly learn. I want everyone to know that this is a synopsis of what I believe today, and it's subject to change. I'm not saying this is the truth. I'm just saying it's something I believe, and I'm trying to understand greater. I believe faith is an organic thing. It's living and ever-changing. If your faith stops being organic and stops growing, I think you miss out a lot about how the Creator deals with us. And so while it might be provocative and you might disagree with my views, my hope is that it will stimulate you to think about these issues and what does faith mean. So I'm going to start by talking, and Dave, you could move the camera over to the slides so people can see the slides and read along. The slides will be available in PDF format if you write to us. We will send them to you. It's pretty much, I want to be able to give the talk and then have you look at the slides. Yeah, I would just focus right in on the screen there, Dave, so they can see it. So one of the things I've learned in life is the greatest barrier to learning is thinking that you already know. The preconceived notion, if you will, is a great barrier in learning. George Harrison said something just before he died. He had cancer. He was the quiet Beatles. And he says, I get confused when I look around at the world. Everybody's running around, and as Bob Dylan said, he not busy being born is busy dying. And yet nobody's trying to figure out what's the cause of death and what happens when we die. To me, that is the only thing of any real importance. The rest is all secondary. The idea that if you're not growing, you're shrinking. And that's true in a lot of things, such as business and wherever else. The other problem we have is seeing the forest through the trees. We have children we have to deal with. We have parents. We have friends. We have a job. And trying to have all these trees up close, it's hard to see the forest that we live in. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, there was a little preface, but I'm going to talk about the approach. I'm going to talk about some definitions that I think are important, a scientific discussion about the standard model of our understanding of the universe, including quantum mechanics, the biocentric model, which I've been studying a lot, those implications relating to the biblical narrative and the afterlife and conclusions. So some amazing things have happened in the last few weeks with Ross's teaching kind of co-opting some of the stuff I was talking about, totally independently, by the way. He's not coming at it from a point of view of quantum mechanics. So the exegesis about it is, there's biblical and other sacred literature. There are, say, for instance, books of wisdom, which are not part of the canon of the Bible, but they're still incredible books. There's cultural and historical types of, books that are read, and context is important. Culturally, we know context is extremely important. And you can just look to the United States and see how people in New York City versus Baton Rouge, Louisiana, think very differently. And, of course, the personal. So I'm going to ask you to come on a little spiritual journey tonight, and I know that gets some people nervous. This is not religious, what I'm talking about. It's faith, and it's a spiritual thing. So we're going to look at the deeper meaning and the profound nature of something that we call faith. I don't think it's always a comfortable ride. And if you get upset and makes you think or want to yell or scream a little bit, that's a good thing. we got to really kind of raise our consciousness a little bit, because people don't realize the miracle of living every day. And there's a famous seafarer named John Augustus Shedd who said, "A ship is safe in a harbor, but that's not what ships are for." By the way, there's an aquarium in San Diego called the Shedd Aquarium named after him. So what is the definition of faith? Let's just look at a dictionary definition to start with, and that is a complete trust or confidence in someone or something. Another concept is a strong belief in God or in the doctrines of a religion based on a spiritual apprehension rather than proof. And that's the world's way of viewing things. There's a lawnmower in the background. So what is faith? I want to give you some people's thoughts in different parts of life other than the truly just strictly religious. I believe in the sun even when it's shining. I believe in love even when I don't feel it. And I believe in God even when he's silent. And it was found scratched in a wall at Auschwitz. Never be afraid to trust an unknown future to a known God. Corée Temblum. And then, of course, another powerful one from the man who sat by the pond. All I have seen teaches me to trust the Creator for all I have not seen. Ralph Waldo Emerson. So I'm going to discuss a little bit of the profound concept of faith. So one of the things I want to look back at the 90,000 foot level is, who are you? Well, we're born into the world in ignorance. We're maybe in a crib, and we have no idea. We just all of a sudden show up and our lights are on. We're like, who's that woman that comes and feeds me? And why do they smile and every time they see me? And everything's beautiful. And then we get up. And that paradigm, unfortunately, is embedded in us. Okay? And the problem is our vision is limited to see what is only in front of us. And it takes an effort to see what lies beyond. And I'm going to talk about that. But one of the biggest problems in science is that people, they want experiential proof. They want to see something, and that's a tough thing to think beyond that. Another issue is that we're brought up in the world to fit in and to adhere to what society demands. And I rebelled and thrive in rebelling against the status quo. It's part of my spiritual DNA. And maybe you have rebelled as well, and that's what I'm trying to think. Something that my dad pounded in our heads when we were young and searching is the truth is all that matters. Now, what the truth is, that's a debate. But if you want to just allow things to be part of your faith and your religion that aren't true or based on the facts, that can be very, very negative for you in the end. And all of a sudden, you'll believe in just kind of fantasies and so forth. So another thing that really hit me was my son dying at the age of 34. And for a person of mature faith, how did that happen? And I started thinking about death. You don't think about death. I think the younger you are, the less you think about death, which is a good thing. But as you get older and you start seeing that, there's going to be a limit, you start thinking about it. One of the things that I like, Ray Kurzweil, who's this inventor and theorist, futurist, said, death gives meaning to our lives. It gives importance and value to time. Time would become meaningless if there were too much of it. And it sounds harsh, but it's a true statement. I worked really hard on this presentation today because I knew I had to start at 6. I'm only kidding. I've been working on this presentation a long time. And I like this philosopher, William Godwin, in 1809. He wrote, "The enormity of death is the greatest of earthly calamities. Loss is perhaps greater in him who survives than in him who dies. Not because the dead are comfortably at the mercy of God, but because the dead are no more than they were before they were unborn." In the book of Isaiah, it's written, "For Sheol cannot thank you, death cannot praise you. Those who go down to the pit cannot hope for your faithfulness." Pretty powerful words. In Psalm 115, the dead do not praise the Lord, nor do any that go down into silence. In a book of wisdom, a Jewish book of wisdom that's not canonical, the wisdom called Sirach, from the dead, as from one who does not exist, thanksgiving has ceased, and he who is alive and well sings the Lord's praises. I think one of the things that is really important from my perspective is enjoying each day and living in the present moment, which is difficult for sapient beings to do. We'll describe what sapient beings are in a moment. But the idea is we think about the past or we're worried about the future, and really all we have is right here and right now. And that's an important thing to remember. So the other issue I'm going to be talking about is what I call the Creator, and I will use the term Yud He Vav He, and these are the English transliterations. There are different ways in which people like to pronounce the name, and the more I studied how to pronounce the name, the more I'm unsure of how it's pronounced. I read many books, and I don't think that's important. I see those letters, and I think no matter what name, if we're thinking only of him, that's a good thing. Powerful thing happened in the theophany on Mount Sinai, Exodus chapter 3. He gave us a name, but there's a lot more. And Dr. James Tabor is working on the Transparent English Version, the TEV, and I like it. It doesn't read as smooth and eloquently as some of the other versions, but it's very closer to the Hebrew. And Hebrew is a very different language and different way of thinking. Not only a different alphabet and a different way of writing, but conceptually the grammar and syntax are very different than English. But in Exodus chapter 3, verse 13, we write, "And Moses said toward the Elohim," that's the word we're going to be using for God here, "Look, I come toward the sons of Israel, and I say toward them, the Elohim of your fathers has sent me toward you." So it's not to you, it's toward you. And there's a big thing you're going to hopefully realize here in a minute. "And they say to me, what's his name? What shall I say toward them?" And the Elohim said toward Moses, "I will be who I will be." And he said, "Thus shall you say to the sons of Israel, I will be has sent me toward you." The profundity of that statement and more study of the name, which I'm not going to get into here, are mind-boggling. But what does the name mean? Wow, it's a powerful name. My own personal belief, there are 4 powers that guide the universe. The nuclear force, the strong nuclear force, gravity, and electromagnetism. And it so happens that Jehovah or the Yud He Vav He has 4 names, 4 letters in his name. I don't believe that's an accident. I believe he is the force that holds and binds the universe. So that's what I'm saying. And then, of course, in the book of Job, we find out if he thought only of himself and withdrew his spirit and his breath or his force, all living beings would die altogether and humanity would return to dust. So right now in this room, the power of the Almighty is keeping everything alive and in check. And people don't realize the blessing of that the Almighty chose to bring you out of the dust and into the way. I'm going to also give them another point of view, which most people won't understand right yet, but the observer from a quantum mechanics point of view. And when I lay out my theory, you'll see where that fits in. So there are big questions, and I know there's a big picture that we're talking about. What is life, and what's the whole thing about? Of course, you've probably seen some of my quotes before, but I like this one. This one was brought up by George Bernard Shaw. The reasonable man adapts himself to the world. The unreasonable one persists in trying to adapt the world to himself. Therefore, all progress depends on the unreasonable man. And if you think about the news today, you might agree with that statement. Of course, the books of wisdom, and of course, the book of wisdom in the Bible and the canonized Bible is Proverbs, and I read it constantly, and it really attracts me to this faith. By wisdom, Jehovah laid the foundation of the earth. By understanding, he established the heavens. By his knowledge, the deep waters were divided, and the skies dropped dew. I'm going to make sense of this in a more detailed way if you let me go further. So remember, wisdom is the thing. Hermann Hesse wrote and said, "Hertha, I'm telling you what I have discovered. Knowledge can be communicated, but not wisdom. One can find it, live it, be fortified by it, and do wonders through it, but one cannot communicate and teach it. And we can talk about that later in a little more detail. As Galileo said, all truths are easy to understand once they're discovered. The point is to discover them. And in this human history, we have these little moments in time where we get to see something. I think I've seen something. I'm not trying to be too smug and arrogant, but I think I was in the right place at the right time to put this together. Not that I'm some sort of genius. I just happen to be at the right place. Studying, reading. So science and faith. I like this, a very famous Jewish scientist, Alan Sokal, said, whenever conflict arises between religion and science, it's due to human error, either through misinterpretation of religious scriptures, which there's been a lot of that, or the lack of a more complete understanding of science or true science. If religious teachings diverge from true science, they should not be accepted. Religion has to be as reasonable as we have been born with reason so as to discover truth. And I think if you see what I'm going to say today, you might agree with this more. Of course, the Rambam, Moses Maimonides, said, you are no doubt aware that the Almighty, desiring to lead us to perfection and to improve our state of society, has revealed to us laws which are to regulate our actions, i.e. the Torah. These laws, however, presuppose an advanced state of intellectual culture, which isn't always available. We must first form a conception of the existence of the Creator according to our capabilities. That is, we must have a knowledge of metaphysics. But this discipline can only be approached after the study of physics, for the science of physics borders on metaphysics and must even precede it in the course of our studies, as it is clear to all who are familiar with these questions. A lot different than, say, the Catholic Church treated scientists. So Maimonides lived in Egypt in the Middle Ages. Another brilliant man that I would say is the second greatest scientist of the 20th century said this: I would rather have questions that can't be answered than answers that can't be questioned. Feynman. He, of course, is the one who made quantum mechanics come to its incredible level in the 1960s with a Japanese scientist. And you should read up on why this guy was. He would give talks. So he'd come to like Cornell University and he would just give a talk on how to think. I mean, this brilliant Nobel Prize guy, and he had humor. So it's funny, a very Jewish background, but was not a believer. So another great scientist who I very much admire from the scientific point of view is Dr. Richard Mueller, and he wrote a great book called Death Star, about binary stars, and he's a senior scientist at Lawrence Berkeley Labs. In fact, most scientists, myself included, have found that if you dismiss out of hand all claims of great new discoveries, you'll be right 95% of the time. So skepticism is rewarded. You realize I'm trying to also say this about your religious life and your faith. It's awful easy to become skeptical. But every once in a while, there will be that rare occasion when you are wrong. So you may have missed an important discovery because of it. So our perception of reality, this is the standard view. And it's also known as reductive materialism. So in this role, physics caused the universe to come into existence. Then there was a complex chemistry out of which miraculously biology appeared, and then psychology, and then eventually a consciousness. So it was very a matter of just chance that this all happened. Of course, in this model, this is what it's kind of turned into. The theory of quantum mechanics at the low level, the theory of relativity, and hopefully maybe the theory of strings would put this kind of back together for us. And maybe that's what will happen. But there's a big question that I'm going to use another term, an inconvenient truth. And that is, what does this model imply? The universe is dumb. It just happened. So when you're talking about it being the creator, you mean an ignorant creator, a dumb creator. That's what you mean. That's the implication if you look at predicate calculus, because it doesn't have a consciousness or a mind. There's a different view in the Hebrew Bible. So what the Bible says in Genesis 1:26, and God, or Elohim, said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the bird of the heavens, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth." And so what I believe this is we're part of a family. I'm not going to go into a large discussion about this, but there's a big difference between the word God and Elohim. God has very Greek and Roman meanings attached to it. Elohim is much more the Hebraic version. If you go truly Hebraic, it just means mighty one, doesn't mean God, because other people were called Elohim in the Holy Scriptures. Yahweh or Jehovah, that's the name of the Creator. So that's different. So you can say Yahweh Elohim, so he is a mighty one, but it doesn't mean that there aren't other mighty ones. And he's called what? The God of gods, or the Elohim of Elohim. He's the mighty one of all the mighty ones. So there's other mighty ones. And I'm not trying to create some sort of Roman or Greco religion. It's just other people were called that. My belief, and subject to change, is that we're part of that family. So God had offspring, i.e. his children, his sons and daughters, and we're of the same family of him. We're put in human bodies, but our spirits are part of the Elohim family, the B'nai Elohim, I believe. So what science says also is really problematic, and they always merge these two topics, the origin of life and evolution. They're not the same topics. I'm going to categorize a few things, and then I'm going to talk about consciousness a little bit. So science doesn't have all the answers. When they merge these two, they do this to put things over on you. The origin of life from non-living elements. There's no model that makes this happen. There's no model that makes this happen. There isn't. That a bunch of carbon on the ground all of a sudden sparked and started thinking. So secondly, evolution as the sole designer. So evolution and the origin of life are two different subjects. Please keep that straight with y'all. Thank you. So how did the life begin? Well, according to scientists, this primordial soup begot things that started to live. Unfortunately, there's no viable mechanism to generate the primordial soup. Forming polymers requires the dehydration synthesis. And to get complex molecules, if you don't have this, then how did that happen? RNA, so DNA and RNA are the structures of our body. The world hypothesis lacks any confirming evidence. Unguided chemical processes cannot explain the origin of the genetic code. And the genetic code is brilliant. I'm telling you. And there's no workable model, as I said, for the origin of life. So for all their science, they can't say when t equals 0, how did life start? And that's a big problem for them. You'll hear them use terms like, well, it came from somewhere else. Well, somewhere else it's got started. All right? I'm just telling you this. There are a lot of issues with evolution as the sole designer. So let me get into those really quickly. There's a lack of a viable mechanism for producing high levels of complex and specified informations. And so one of the problems is that the Darwinian mechanism producing irreducibly complex features and the problems of non-functional or deleterious intermediate stages. There's just no evidence of that. And there's no way how that started. Fossil record, which they claim is so complete, is extremely not complete. And I'm just being honest because I wanted to study evolution to make sure that it worked. There's just these huge leaps in their story. The failure of molecular biology to provide evidence of the tree of life. There's just nothing in molecular biology. It just existed. So if you accept that it just existed, then molecular biology is very accurate. But how did it just exist? Natural selection is an extremely inefficient method of spreading traits in populations unless a trait has an extremely high selection coefficient. So we have a lot of traits that don't have a high selection coefficient. Why do we have those traits? The problem of convergent evolution appears rampant. Darwin says this wouldn't happen. So convergent evolution means that in South America, certain animals evolved just like they did in the Pacific Islands, all right? And that's a very unlikely thing. So that's one of them. Another one, the failure of chemistry to explain the origin of the genetic code. The failure of developmental biology to explain why vertebrate embryos diverge from the beginning of development in utero. There's nothing that all of a sudden just miraculously happens. The failure of the neo-Darwinians' evolution to explain the biogeographical distribution of many species. Long history of inaccurate predictions inspired by them, and this is really relevant in the junk DNA. And of course, humans show many behavioral and cognitive traits and abilities that offer no apparent survival advantage. Music, art, religion, to ponder the nature of the universe. These really don't help survival if you're out there listening to an orchestra play. So one of the things that I have to set up before I go into my real deep part of my talk is the fact that humans are different from all other species of the animal kingdom. Humans have long-range consciousness, meaning they can retain perceptions, cogitate on them, abstract from them, and then recombine those abstractions into new concepts. This is what's called sapience. So we have a consciousness of our consciousness, and we can build upon our knowledge, increasing the amount of sapience we contain in our minds. You might have heard the term Homo sapien. Maybe now you understand what it is. An anthropologist, Lauren Eiseley, said the consciousness of animals left them in the eternal present, meaning because they cannot retain perceptions, then abstract, and then recombine what they know, they're forever stuck in the same moment of time as their ancient ancestors, the present. And Ayn Rand called it the range of moment consciousness. And there's things fuzzy between all these. They're not discrete digital values. They fuzz off a little bit. But meaning that whatever the ability they have to be aware of what is going on about them, it lasts only for the length of that moment. And when that moment is over, they're back in Eiseley's eternal present. So when your dog sees you when you just come home, that's a beautiful thing. It's okay. So consciousness is the state of being awake and aware of one's surroundings. Life contains consciousness. While animals are essentially conscious, the most evolved are at best sapient and are sentient, and humankind is both sentient and sapient. Sentience is the noun of sentient, and it's the capability to feel, perceive, or experience subjectively. In modern Western philosophy, it's the ability to experience sensations. In Eastern philosophy, it's a metaphysical quality of all things that require respect and care. Very similar, but a little different. Sapiens, the noun of sapient, is the ability to think and to reason. It may not seem like much of a difference, but the ability to reason is tied very closely to sapience than to sentience. Most animals are sentient. You can say your dog is sentient, but only humans are sapient. So, again, in this, I added on Genesis 1:26 here, 27, so God created man in his own image. The image of God, he created them male and female. So if you say, so Elohim created man in his own image, the image of Elohim, he created a male and female. So we're a reflection of God's design. I think the spiritual part of us. I don't think God has a body like we do, but the spiritual part of us, the soul, if you will. So beyond consciousness, sentience, and sapience is faith. And that's why I consider it extremely profound. Again, humans are different from the balance of the animal kingdom. Only humans have faith. Nothing else in the known universe does. And this is an important point that I'm trying to lay down. I've showed this before, that, the model for human living things, guaranteed human development. We understand what data is. We can abstract that and call that information. We can process that, and that's knowledge. And if you're not mentally disabled, everyone can do this. They choose not to sometimes, but they can do this. But wisdom is a different thing. Not everyone becomes wise. So I look at this as higher levels of consciousness. You've heard the Eastern philosophy talk. So consciousness is at that kind of bottom level. And a lot of animals are very conscious. Some are even sentient. If you look at the way tigers hunt, or these other types of animals, horses. I don't know if you've ever dealt with horses, but they seem almost like elephants. They're borderlining on that, but they don't have both sapience and sentience. So this is just something. So we in the Hebrew world have many sapiential books, or the books of wisdom. There's 7 of these books, the books of Job, most of the Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, the Book of Wisdom, and the Song of Songs, and Syriac or Ecclesiastes if you're in outside the biblical canon. And there are other books of wisdom, so when people did this. Now, we know it from our Hebrew Bible that Solomon was called the assembler of wisdom. So the book of Ecclesiastes is really not the preacher, it's the assembler, and he assembled wisdom, meaning he got it from other places besides himself. The problem with this, giving this kind of power to people who really don't understand it, is that we continue to move on. And technology is increasing at an accelerated rate. If you look at the last 200 years and compare that to the last 2,000 years, my goodness, things are moving quickly. Technical singularity is a possibility. It's the hypothesis that the invention of artificial superintelligence will abruptly trigger runaway technology growth, resulting in unfathomable changes to our existence. Trust me, this will happen if we live long enough. According to this hypothesis, an upgraded intelligent agent, such as a computer running software-based artificial intelligence, would enter a runaway reaction of self-improvement cycle, and with each new and more intelligent generation appearing more and more rapidly, causing an intelligence explosion and resulting in a powerful superintelligence that would qualitatively surpass all human intelligence. That's very scary. We're not there yet. Don't get me wrong. Don't go running away. But as we go through and look at what's happened just in, say, cell phones in the last 10 years, becoming smartphones and so forth. There were other people besides me that were concerned about that. Stanislaw Ulam and John von Neumann. This is in the 50s. John von Neumann is the German Austrian scientist who invented the computer as we know it today, centered on the accelerating progress of technology and changes in the mode of human life, which gives the appearance of approaching some essential singularity in the history of our race, beyond which human affairs as we know them will not continue. So be careful when you started playing with these powerful tools. 4 polls conducted in 2013, 2012 said that they felt it could arrive as soon as 2040 or 2050. A lot of people also say 2080, but no one says they'll be by 2100, definitely. So here we are being sapient. We're worrying about 100 years from now. You know what I mean? And there's other people, such as Dr. Stephen Hawking and Elon Musk. They're very concerned about this. This could result in human extinction. And the consequences of the singularity and its potential benefit or harm to the human race have been hotly debated. Some people are saying, no, it couldn't possibly happen. Given the history and the exponential rise of technology, I believe it's possible. So something struck me, and really, so the standard model is they're having trouble getting a theory of everything, and so something came up about 2008 that I started researching, and the question was asked, what's the most profound mystery in biology? So even if there was a way to generate life, how do you generate consciousness? And that's the powerful thing about this theory, Dr. Robert Lanza. It's called biocentrism. It's revamping the paradigm of our understanding. So Dr. Robert Lanza is a medical doctor and scientist, and he had published a theory in 2007, a new theory of the universe. It appeared in the American Scholar, and it's the concept that it's a biocentric universe, which means there was a consciousness that created the universe, not the other way around. So remember, the current model says the universe happened and then consciousness popped out. He said consciousness was there and the universe popped out. And have to really rethink from a scientific point of view. Now, Dr. Robert Lanza was recently determined to be one of the 3 most important living scientists in the world. He will no doubt get a Nobel Prize for his research in stem cells. So he's truly a scientist and an MD and a philosopher. So what does this do? Well, this turns that pyramid upside down. Consciousness created all of this, all right? And that's the biocentric view. So biocentrism, the universe arises from life, not the other way around, Dr. Robert Lanza. So we're switching to perspective of the universe from physics to biology and everything we know in the universe and the life in it. We think that life is just an accident of physics, but as long a list of experiments says that's not the case. And it's a way to solve one of the biggest puzzles in science. And another thing that's hard to get your mind wrapped around is that it becomes clear that space and time and the properties of matter themselves depend upon the observer. Something that we knew, the universe is fine-tuned for life itself. There are like over 200 parameters that say this, that if it wasn't these exact parameters, life couldn't exist. So you got to think about that. There was a philosopher that I love, Ralph Waldo Emerson, and he said, "We have learned that we do not see directly." Now, this isn't a scientist. Now, think about this corollary that I'm trying to make here. We have learned that we do not see directly, but immediately, and that we have no means of correcting these colored and distorted lenses, which we are, or of computing the amount of their errors. Perhaps these subject lenses have a creative power. Perhaps there are no objects. So he had that kind of philosophy hundreds of years. If you've ever been to Walden Pond, it is a breathtaking place to go. And it was saved just 10 years ago. The 7 principles of biocentrism. Again, what we perceive as reality is a process that involves our consciousness. Our external and internal perceptions are inextricably intertwined. They are different sides of the same coin and cannot be divorced. The behavior of subatomic particles, indeed all the particles, is inextricably linked to the presence of the observer. We'll go through that. Without consciousness, matter dwells in an undetermined state of probability, and any universe that could have preceded consciousness only existed in a probability state. Oddly enough, Ross talked about this in his own way in his last talk, and I'm going to go through that. The 5th is that the structure of the universe is explainable only through biocentrism. And of course, it would have to have that if that's what you believe. Time does not have a real existence outside the animal sense perception, and it is the process by which we perceive changes in the universe. You've heard this thing that a day is like 1,000 years, is like one day to God, and these kinds of things. Space, like time, is not an object or a thing. It's another form of our animal understanding and does not have an independent reality. We carry space and time around with us like turtles with shells. Thus, there's no absolute self-existing matrix in which physical events occur independent of life. You could say this would be the mind of Jehovah. So about 100 years ago, quantum mechanics changed everything. So quantum mechanics is a fundamental theory in physics which describes the nature at the smallest scales of energy and levels of atoms and subatomic particles. Quantum means that the levels of energy are quantized, and there's no, they're only discrete levels. There's no analog. So there's no 5.5 level. There's a 1 level, a 2 level, a 4 level, and a 5 level, and so on and so forth. Classical physics that existed before quantum mechanics is a set of fundamental theories which describes nature at ordinary or macroscopic levels. Quantum mechanics differs from classical physics in that energy, momentum, and other quantities of a system may be restricted to discrete or quantized values. Objects have characteristics of both particles and waves. It's called the wave-particle duality, and there are limits to the precision with which quantities can be known. This is known as the uncertainty principle. The quantum observer effect. So the idea behind the observer effect is that before any system is measured, it exists in a superposition of states, meaning all positions are possible. So relating this back to the double slit experiment, we noticed that when the electrons are not being monitored, they form an interference pattern. But what is the single electron interfering with? The answer is that it's interfering with itself. This is something you can do in your kitchen, the double slit experiment. And it passes through both slits, existing in superposition of states. But when we observe which path the electron takes, it's forced to choose. So it goes from a wave to a particle, which slit it goes through, and no longer interferes with itself, just because we're observing it. And this doesn't make sense to people, but try the experiment. It's amazing. The mere act of observing has changed the outcome of a system and caused the so-called wave function to collapse into one value. Something to think about. So a famous one is Schrodinger's cat. It's a thought experiment. This didn't really happen. Don't get worried. There was no harming of cats. and is being included here in order that we can go to introduce the concept of the wave function. The focus of this experiment is the idea of superposition. An object existing in conflicting states simultaneously. So a cat is placed in a box along with a Geiger counter. There's a tiny bit of radioactive substance which has an equal probability of decaying and not decaying in the next hour. And if the substance does decay, the counter tube discharges and through a relay releases a hammer that shatters a small flask of cyanide, killing the cat. So what then happens is that when we, so until we observe what happened, the cat is it's both alive and dead at the same time. So when we observe it, we determine whether the cat is dead. This is something you have to really read about and study to get your hands on, but superposition is a very powerful thing. The observation changes the value. So the observer effect is one of the other things that's really odd about it is a double slit experiment, and this has been proven many times. So let me take a quick look at this right here. So what happens is sunlight hits a single slit, and it has a normal distribution, and it's perfectly fine. But you cut two slits in the next board, and there's different particles that follow through on it. So if we don't look at it, it has a certain distribution. But as soon as we measure it or look at it, it changes. And so the double slit also happened. And the double slit said this bizarre thing. So the double slit, we look at something, it changes from waves into particles. Okay, that's fine. Now we look at the second double slit. And the second double slit said, if we look at it here, it changes the result of the prior double slit, which already passed in time. Wait a minute. How can it go backwards and change what it did? Well, it does. And the Germans have proven this, and it's very brilliant. Very deep science. But again, the double slit looks at the reverse quantum functions. So our interfering with the universe changes its very nature. Von Neumann, Wigner were two great German physicists, and they also described this consciousness collapse of the wave function as an interpretation in which, in quantum mechanics, consciousness is postulated to be necessary for the completion of the process of any measurement. These are smart people, and they had some friends that also agreed with them. John von Neumann and Wigner, Dr. Wheeler, Dr. Stapp, Penrose, Kafatos, Niels Bohr, and Heisenberg, who invented, and Schrödinger, they invented quantum mechanics, Max Planck, Jordan, Pauli, Dr. Dirac. These are the smartest minds of the last century, and they all understood this. And they didn't know how to describe it. So Niels Bohr, who was essentially the inventor of quantum mechanics, said, anyone who's not shocked by quantum theory hasn't understood it. So again, when you get this feeling of what happens, you might get that. In reply to Einstein's quote, God doesn't play dice with the universe because he couldn't understand the probabilistic value, Niels Bohr said, Einstein, don't tell God what to do. Now, funny thing that I wanted to tell you before we go on any further, it's because of Einstein's photoelectric effect studies that quantum mechanics became. So he created the basic theory of what started quantum mechanics that he totally hated and fought against vehemently. And these discussions, I could only have been fortunate if we could have been there hearing these people argue these things, because these are brilliant minds doing that. The observer effect is rooted in scientific experiments. There's no way to get around that. So this is all in the last 100 years or so. We're getting close to that. Then there was Genesis and the Big Bang. This is now going from quantum mechanics to relativity. And Dr. Gerald Schroeder, who's alive today, wrote a book called Genesis and the Big Bang. And Dr. Schroeder was a Jewish atheist who was involved in the nuclear program. You read his book, some very interesting things he talks about. And he said he was going to kind of prove how God was wrong, how this book was wrong. And the more he started to prove it wrong, the more he started believing. He's like, oh no, maybe there is just this thing. So the perspective of the point of the origin of the Big Bang, according to Einstein's equations for the stretching factor, time dilates by a factor of roughly 1 trillion. Meaning 1 trillion days on Earth would appear to pass as 1 day from that point due to the stretching of space. When applied to the estimated age of the universe of 13.8 billion years, in the center it's been 6 days plus. Now think about that for a moment. In the middle, maybe where Jehovah is centered, it's been 6.5 days. But it's been 15 billion years. Here's another bizarre thing about time. So in the center could be 6 days. At the edge is 15 billion years. But guess what the other edge of the universe? That's 30 billion years away. So all of a sudden, how can something go back in time? That's the bizarre nature of time. So I'm just telling you that. Anthony Flew, who is an academic philosopher, he promoted atheism like crazy. He read the book and he said, there must be a God. Amazing that someone that brilliant would also do that. So I just talked about the observer effect, consciousness, and I talked about the way the universe was thought to be created. And if we look at the transparent English version, which Dr. James Tabor is leading, and he's had other folks help him with, we see in Genesis 1, at the first of Elohim creating the skies and the land was desolate and empty, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the spirit of Elohim was hovering over the face of the waters. Elohim said, let there be light, and there was light. Now wait a minute. He called on it. His consciousness interfered with it. So there was this primordial, just unobserved states, and God said, I want light, and he created light. It's brilliant. And Elohim saw the light, that it was good, and he separated the two, right? We know this. The light was called day, and the darkness was called night, and it was evening and morning, day one. So in the Hebraic version, the day starts at night and ends in light. Just to be, why do we celebrate Shabbat starting on the nighttime? It's because that's when the Shabbat starts, the seventh day starts. So two things. The other thing that Einstein and then, of course, the Big Bang Theory said was this. First thing created was light. It was called the photon. So Genesis 1 agrees with this biocentric point of view, and it agrees with the standard physics point of view that the first thing created was light. Now think about that. Was this just a lucky guess? I don't think so. When you talk about faith being profound, I accepted this in the beginning, and I had no idea that I'd be talking here so many years later about this subject. But true science agrees exactly with what this says in the Bible. Now think about that. That consciousness had to be there to create it, and the first thing created was light. I think that's mind-boggling. I don't think it's just a lucky guess. I think it's something that was real. So consciousness caused creation, and light was the first thing that was created. So that to me is a very important thing. So some other biblical evidence. Psalm 33, by the word of Jehovah were the heavens made, and all the host of them by the breath of his mouth. Holy cow. This to me is stunning. Now, I never looked at Psalm 33 like that before, but it's opening my eyes. Proverbs 3:19 through 20, Yahweh by wisdom founded the earth. By understanding he established the heavens. By his knowledge the depths were broken up, and the skies dropped down dew. And in the book of Isaiah, for thus saith Jehovah that created the heavens, the God that transformed the earth and made it, that established it and created it not waste, that formed it to be inhabited. Remember, I am Jehovah and there is none else. Remember I said in the beginning, there were 200 parameters that had to be perfect for life to exist? Again, was this just dumb luck or dumb universe? So then finally, I want to go about looking at the mind of God and about how detailed is his ability and how much detail. There's a limit to the detail that's required. So the smallest unit of time, or a time quanta, is the time it takes light to travel Planck's length. It's known as Planck's time, Max Planck. So since distance or relativity stop and quantum mechanics takes over a Planck length, actions across length less than this boundary are meaningless to the scientists. The fastest speed attainable is the speed of light in most circumstances. There are things that go faster than the speed of light, but this is the common speed limit of the universe. So if we take the smallest length and divide it by the fastest speed, we get the time it takes for the fastest thing to travel the shortest distance. And what this implies is times shorter than this are really nonsensical. So you have Planck's length. So that's 1.6 times 10 to the minus 35th meters. So that is 35 zeros before the 1.6. So you think about that. So you have 1 meter, but you have 35 zeros. You chop it up that many times. You can't even see something like that. It's just minuscule. The speed of light, as you know, 3 times 10 to the 8th meters per second, 186,000 miles per second. And so Planck's time is about 5.4 times 10 to the minus 44th seconds. So that's 44 zeros in front of that. So if you think of a tenth of a second, a hundredth of a second, a thousandth of a second, this has got 44 zeros in front of it. So the fidelity, so if there are that many quanta in a second, that's what it looks like if you wrote it out. So the second is chopped into that many parts. Think about that for a moment. Compare that to the samples on a CD. So high fidelity music is 44,000 times a second is chopped up. This is this unbelievable number that God can do. So where do the memories go? Well, in accordance with quantum mechanics, they're in an unobserved probabilistic state. The dead do not praise Yah. Again, the Bible is agreeing with what's being said. They still exist. That's the difference. The scientists even have to admit this. Every thought or experience you have had ever is quantized and left to the ether of the overall reality of your existence. Every thought and experience of everyone, even the animals, even what the plants felt, ever, are in the memory that Jehovah can pull upon. So everything, and you can't lie about that, Sherry, once you did this or that, or Jodell or Jack. Once we've done things, we can't say that we didn't do them, because the Almighty has your pre-thoughts that he can pull out. So what's the only difference about those things in an unobserved state? They need a consciousness to bring it out. You follow what I'm saying? And who has control over that database? There's only one that I believe, and that's Jehovah. He can pull out anything about anyone at any time. He can pull out the fact that your cat had a bad day and why your cat had a bad day. That's the fidelity of the Almighty. It is beyond our comprehension. And we don't even know why we feel like we feel. That's why he's the judge of judges. He can judge you. He can say, I gave you this good life and you did these bad things. Or he can say, I gave you a bad life and you did good things. You know, the choice is yours. That's the thing. So what this impacted me and my faith, and that's how I'm going to try to end this, is there are two ways in which you can live. Einstein said this. You can live as if nothing is a miracle, or that if everything is a miracle. And I've chosen to look at everything as a miracle. I don't think the fact that I met all of you people is a mistake or some dumb luck. I think there's a reason, because all of you have given me knowledge. I try to give some back. We all worked and looked and commiserated together. I believe that that's why we're here. Life is a miracle. And when I get up now, I really have a different view about the day. It's a beautiful thing. David Ben-Gurion, who again wasn't a real believer, but he did help found the modern state of Israel, said, a Jew who doesn't believe in miracles is not a realist. And if you go to Israel, I think you'll agree with me. It's a beautiful place. Another person said, life is an ongoing revelation. What has been revealed to us today couldn't have been revealed yesterday, and we would not have understood it. And this is me, because I had these revelations made to me, at a certain time. I became a CEO of a company at a certain time. Before that, I wouldn't have been right. And whatever happened when I was ready. And there's a big difference in thinking that there is a certain sequence to life. So where are the souls of the dead? Something that concerned my faith when my son died. Well, the Book of Wisdom says the souls of the dead, souls of the just are in the hand of God, and no torment shall touch them. They seemed, in the view of the foolish, to be dead, and their passing away was thought and affliction, and their going forth from us utter destruction. But they are at peace. Listen, I believe science is the same thing. And I'm ascribing a feeling to that science, but in that place, my son or our parents or our grandparents or whoever else has died, they're not in any kind of burning hell or whatever. And I don't believe they're walking down Hallelujah Boulevard in heaven. And when the Almighty determines that he's going to end the whole thing, the experiment of humankind, he'll bring them back if he needs to. And there's prophecies in the books that say that. So I believe that they're in the unobserved state until they're observed again. And who will be that observer? I believe that's Jehovah. And I believe that Jehovah is the only one who has access to that overall pool. That's just my belief. Some parting thoughts. Accept what is, let go of what was, and have faith in what will be. Sonia Riccardi, who's an Italian philosopher that lives in Toronto, Canada, excuse me. Death is no more than passing from one room to another. But there's a difference for me, because in that other room, I will be able to see. Sorry, it really affects me. Helen Keller. And we're not human beings having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience. This says in 1935 from a Jesuit scholar in France. I'm just telling you, people saw through this. They didn't need the science to see through this, you see. Some more thoughts on death. In 1955, when Michel Bessel died, he was one of Einstein's best friends. Albert Einstein wrote, "Now he has departed from this strange world a little ahead of me. That means nothing. People like us who believe in physics know that the distinction between the past, present, and future is only a stubbornly persistent illusion." Again, it isn't the religious point of view, but it's just strange. And I love Henry Van Dyke. He said, "Time is slow for those who wait, too swift for those who fear, too long for those who grieve, too short for those who rejoice. But for those who love, time is eternity." Think about that for a moment. And I'm going to go with a final thought from the Creator, from the book of Isaiah, the 25th chapter. "And he will destroy in this mountain the face of the covering that covers all peoples, in the veil that is spread over all nations. He hath swallowed up death forever, and the sovereign Yahweh will wipe away tears from all their faces, and the reproach of his people will he take away from off all the earth, for Yahweh has spoken it." And that's definitely my belief. I'm just going to do a conclusion, and that is coming from the book of Psalms. The friendship of Yahweh or Jehovah is with them that fear him, and he will show them his covenant. Mine eyes are ever toward Jehovah, for he will pluck my feet out of the net. And that's why I look towards. And then finally, this one was just given to me by John and his wife on their little tract from the book of Jonah. And he saith unto them, a Hebrew I am, and Jehovah God of heavens I am reverencing, who made the sea and the dry land. And that's who my faith is in, the Jehovah, the Almighty. So that's a good place to end this talk, and probably it's provocative. Maybe you agree with some of it, maybe you don't, but it certainly should get you thinking about. There's a lot of information out there. I know some people also have a problem with the fact that you ever look at science and have anything spiritual come out of it. I also look at science and say, why don't they have anything spiritual in it? So I'm an open-minded person. Maybe I'm wrong. I might be wrong about these things. But the more correlation I see, the more I have faith in the book they call the Hebrew Bible. Of course, it's not a book. It's a collection of books. It's really a library. And even in some of those books, they were written over vastly different periods, and we know that. So this collection of books has been the study of my life for some time, but it doesn't mean that I'm not afraid to go out and look at other sources and learn other things. Solomon did this, and I believe a lot of people have done this. And the big issue for us all at the end of the day is that what happens when we leave this earth? I quoted George Harrison in the beginning. What happens when we leave this earth? These are certainly things that my son's passing brought out in me to think about more, and I wouldn't have thought about it if he hadn't passed. So I started researching, and I have a lot more than this, but I kind of compacted a lot of data into a 60-minute talk, and I can send you this presentation if you want to write to me. I'm at United Israel Northeast, one word, @gmail.com. United Israel Northeast @gmail.com. And I'll send you this, and so you can look at it. I would like to have a dialogue about this, why you think this is correct, why you don't think it's correct, or other thoughts you have, because I'm open-minded and independent, and I still think for myself, and I hope you all do about religion. Because one thing, when religion becomes that automatic, it becomes religious. And I want to religiously work out every day and eat the right food religiously, but I don't want to have my faith become religious, because in that way it becomes mundane. And so everything is like that. And tomorrow morning, if you have a chance, at 10:30 Central Time, 11:30 a.m. Eastern Time, we're going to have a discussion on what the biblical faith is. And we have a lot of experts here that they're going to talk. I'm hoping that Jodelle Onstott will join us. The Coles, John, Jack is here. There might be other people here. I see Steve in the back. I won't mention his name. He's probably on the lam right now. But all these people are going to be here. And what we're going to do, I'm going to give a little talk right at 10:30. It won't be long. Just what is the biblical faith. And then we'll have a break, and then we'll have a discussion. And we'll talk amongst ourselves openly, hopefully, at the table. But also we'll be looking at people writing in saying what they believe the biblical faith is. And one thing about United Israel, we're not going to tell you how to believe. We'll discuss it, and you believe what you want to believe. But we believe that's between you and the Almighty. And we'll try to give you the best advice we can. But it's an organic thing. It's always changing like the weather. So thank you for watching tonight. I really appreciate it. And if you have any questions, please send in there. And you can even ask tomorrow morning in the dialogue. Thank you and good night. Are we good? Yes. I don't know. I missed.